Imagine standing in the pitch black of a 5-mile underground stone tube.
Oh man, just picturing that is unsettling.
Right. The air is heavy. It smells constantly of damp earth, pulverized quartz, and like old iron. And then suddenly you hear the undeniable rhythmic clink of a pickaxe striking rock just a few feet away from your ear.
Which is terrifying.
Exactly, but you spin around, but you know for an absolute fact that the nearest living human being is over 2 miles down the line.
That sensory contradiction right there, the collision of this harsh industrial reality and completely inexplicable phenomena, that is exactly what we are examining today.
Yes, so welcome to another deep dive. Today we're synthesizing notes and historical accounts centered on the Hoosac Tunnel.
Which is this massive piece of 19th century New England infrastructure.
Bored directly through the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore the incredibly thin line between a historic engineering triumph and a supernatural legend.
Yeah, we really want to decode the specific mechanics of why this dark stretch of rock earned the terrifying moniker, the Bloody Pit.
Which is such an intense nickname. And I love this premise because it challenges everything we are conditioned to expect from a ghost story.
How so?
Well, I mean, we're trained to look for spirits in crumbling Victorian mansions, right? Or like abandoned Gothic asylums.
Oh, sure. The classic haunted house trope.
Exactly. We do not expect them in highly engineered, industrially scaled railroad tunnels that are astonishingly still in active use today by modern freight trains.
Yeah, it's wild. You have 19th century folklore coexisting with 21st century global supply chains.
It's like a haunted highway that massive 18-wheelers still have to drive through in the pitch black.
That's a great way to put it. But, you know, to understand how a public works project transforms into a paranormal hotspot, we have to strip away the ghost stories first.
Right.
We have to look at the brutal economic and geological reality of the 1850s. The socioeconomic pressure driving this project was just immense.
Because Boston was losing out to New York, wasn't it?
Exactly. In the mid-19th century, Boston was losing its economic foothold because New York had the Erie Canal. Massachusetts desperately needed a direct trade route to the west.
But they had a massive geological wall blocking their path.
The Berkshire Mountains. And going around simply wasn't viable for heavy freight. They had to go through. So in 1851, they began the seemingly impossible task of tunneling nearly 5 miles through solid rock.
And the workforce they threw at this problem was, well, it was largely made up of desperate laborers.
Yeah, many of them were Irish immigrants escaping famine.
And experienced Cornish miners looking for wages. The sources note that it took almost 25 years to complete, finally finishing in 1875.
Nearly a quarter of a century just chipping away.
But what I find fascinating is the actual mechanism of the danger. When we read that over 200 workers died during construction, it's easy to just process that as a tragic statistic.
Right, it just becomes a number on a page.
Exactly. But it was like fighting a war underground against the mountain itself. The geology of the Hoosac Mountain made it a uniquely lethal environment.
Because the rock wasn't just dirt and shale. They were cutting through heavily folded mica schist and quartz.
Which is incredibly hard.
Extremely hard. And they were doing it, initially, with just hand drills and black powder. Progress was literally measured in inches per day.
Wow. Inches.
Yeah. But the most insidious threat wasn't the rock itself, it was what the rock contained.
Subterranean water.
Yes.
The accounts describe the environment as relentlessly dark and incredibly wet. It reads less like they were digging a hole and more like they had, punctured the bottom of an ocean.
That water pressure is a critical factor. When you bore into a mountain, you are intersecting with high-pressure underground aquifers.
And these aren't gentle leaks, right?
Oh, no. When a drill breaches a pressurized pocket, millions of gallons of freezing water can explode into the shaft at hundreds of pounds per square inch.
That is terrifying.
Men were swept away, they drowned in the dark, or they were crushed by the sudden geological instability that followed the water release. The mountain was actively repelling the intrusion through hydrostatic pressure.
Which introduces a terrifying paradox. Because alongside the threat of drowning in the dark, you have the threat of fire.
Which sounds impossible in a wet tunnel.
Right. A fire in a subterranean environment operates under completely different physical laws than a fire on the surface. We have notes here on underground fires wiping out entire crews. How does a fire become that catastrophic in a soaking wet tunnel?
It comes down to fluid dynamics. specifically something called the chimney effect.
Okay, explain that for us.
So, to ventilate a 5-mile tunnel, engineers had to dig a central vertical shaft, thousands of feet deep, straight down from the top of the mountain to meet the horizontal tunnel.
Like an intersection.
Exactly. And that vertical shaft acts exactly like a massive flue in a fireplace. If a fire breaks out in the tunnel, say, from a tipped lantern hitting blasting supplies,
Oh, I see where this is going.
yeah, that vertical shaft instantly draws the hot air upward at hurricane speeds.
Pulling all the oxygen out of the horizontal tunnel.
Precisely. It creates a vacuum that aggressively sucks the breathable air away from the workers. The fire doesn't even have to reach you to kill you.
That's awful.
The draft alone will suffocate a crew miles down the line in minutes. It leaves them in total darkness, inhaling toxic smoke with literally nowhere to run.
That structural reality, the chimney effect, combined with the high-pressure aquifers, explains the staggering mortality rate. Over 200 men dead.
It's horrific.
It essentially transforms the space from a work site into a de facto company graveyard. But I want to focus on a specific tragedy mentioned in the sources,
Yeah.
because there was a technological shift that permanently altered the psychology of the tunnel.
Right, the shift away from black powder.
Exactly. Black powder simply wasn't cutting through the quartz fast enough. The investors were bleeding money. So out of sheer desperation, the engineers brought in a brand new, highly experimental chemical.
Nitroglycerin.
Nitroglycerin.
The adoption of nitroglycerin is really the turning point in the Hoosac Tunnel's history. Up until then, black powder was the standard. But black powder only deflagrates.
Meaning it burns very rapidly.
Right. It burns fast to push the rock apart. Nitroglycerin, on the other hand, detonates. It creates a supersonic shockwave that just shatters everything in its path.
And it's notoriously unstable, right? Like, it's a liquid that sweats and degrades.
It is incredibly volatile, especially in the primitive forms they were using in the 1860s. A slight drop in temperature, a jolt, or, even a heavy footprint could trigger a detonation.
So these laborers were essentially walking into a pitch-black, freezing, wet cavern carrying glass vials of liquid death.
That's exactly what they were doing.
Yeah.
And that desperate reliance on experimental chemistry culminated in the disaster of 1867.
The central shaft tragedy. The sources detailed that a massive nitroglycerin blast went off prematurely. 13 men were killed in a single fraction of a second.
And they weren't just killed.
No, the sheer concussive force of a supersonic shockwave inside an enclosed stone tube meant they were virtually vaporized.
Yeah, the physics of an explosion in an enclosed space just magnify the devastation.
Because it can't escape?
Exactly. On the surface, a shockwave dissipates outward. Inside a tunnel, the concussive wave has nowhere to go but straight down the line. It bounces off the walls, compounding its own force.
Wow.
It turns the air itself into a lethal weapon. It ruptures organs before the fire even reaches the victims.
So when a workforce experiences that level of concentrated, violent trauma, 13 men erased instantly, adding to a death toll that would eventually top 200, the stories they tell about the space inevitably mutate.
They have to. It's how people cope.
Right. The tunnel officially earned the name the Bloody Pit. And this is where we see the physical toll translating directly into the supernatural lore. The narrative shifts from engineering reports to ghost stories.
And the most prominent sightings recorded in our sources are ghost lights.
What exactly are those described as?
They're frequently described as mysterious glowing orbs or floating lanterns moving autonomously in the darkness. The local lore insists these are the spirits of the dead laborers.
That makes sense from a psychological perspective.
Definitely. Psychologically, the legends give meaning to the tragedy. The workers believed these lights were either men doomed to forever try and finish the job they started, or benevolent spirits actively trying to warn the living away from structurally compromised areas.
There's a profound sadness to that folklore. The idea that the socioeconomic compulsion to work, to conquer the mountain for a daily wage, was so violently ingrained in these men that it outlasted their own deaths.
It's tragic.
It really is. And the folklore specifically names a man, right? John McKee.
Yes, John McKee.
According to the historical accounts, McKee was a laborer who survived a catastrophic accident inside the tunnel. But the physical survival didn't save him. The trauma entirely shattered his mind.
He represents a very real psychological casualty of industrial expansion. You have to remember, post-traumatic stress was not understood at the time.
Not at all.
Men who survived cave-ins or blast waves were just expected to simply pick up a shovel the next day.
But McKee couldn't do it. The lore states he was last seen walking back into the pitch-black tunnel, completely alone, carrying a single lantern.
And he never returned.
Never returned. His body was never found. And to this day, the lone swinging lantern seen deep inside the tunnel by locals is attributed to him. He was swallowed by the very architecture that traumatized him.
The physical environment consumed him, just as it did the two missing engineers mentioned in the records.
Right, tell us about them.
Well, during the final phases of construction, two engineers completely vanished inside the tunnel. Their bodies were never recovered either.
How did two engineers just vanish?
Given the scale of the cave-ins and the sheer volume of rubble down there, they were essentially entombed within the mountain. The walls of the Hoosac Tunnel are quite literally their final resting place.
Which forces us to look critically at the modern reports.
Yeah.
I mean, my question is, if we have a 5-mile-long soaking wet stone cylinder filled with the actual remains of laborers, and we have people today reporting disembodied voices, cold spots, and the echoes of picks and shovels, how much of this is the supernatural, and how much is the extreme physics of the space playing tricks on a traumatized human mind?
That is the million-dollar question.
Let's examine the acoustics of a 5-mile wet stone pipe.
Acoustically, the Hoosac Tunnel functions very much like the Whispering Gallery in a cathedral, but on a terrifying scale.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, the curved walls of wet mica schist and quartz act as perfect parabolic reflectors. Sound waves do not absorb into the rock. They bounce continuously along the moisture layer.
Meaning like a drop of water falling or a piece of slate shifting 2 miles deep doesn't lose its acoustic energy.
Exactly, it travels for miles. By the time that sound reaches a human ear near the entrance, the frequencies have distorted.
So a shifting rock sounds indistinguishable from a distant pickaxe.
Yes. The ambient wind rushing through the shaft distorts into what sounds like a whispered voice. Your brain is confronted with an ambiguous acoustic pattern, and because of a psychological phenomenon called pareidolia, your brain forces a familiar pattern onto it.
Pareidolia, that's the same mechanism that makes us see faces in the clouds, right? Or hear hidden messages in reverse music.
Exactly that. The brain despises a vacuum of information. If you walk into a space known as the Bloody Pit, knowing 200 men died there, your subconscious is already primed to expect dead miners.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
So when the Whispering Gallery effect delivers a distorted water echo to your ear, your brain effortlessly bridges the gap and constructs a phantom voice.
But that doesn't account for the overwhelming sense of dread people report, or the visual anomalies like the ghost lights. If the sounds are acoustic reflections, what is causing the physical sensation of a haunting?
Well,
I want to look at the modern reality of the tunnel to explain this because, as we mentioned, the Hoosac Tunnel isn't a roped-off museum.
no, it is a critical artery for modern freight. Massive diesel trains barrel through this 19th century nightmare every single day.
Which is just surreal to think about. If you were to stand near the western portal today, you wouldn't just hear the wind. As a freight train approaches from miles away, it acts like a massive piston inside a cylinder.
Right, pushing the air.
Yeah, it pushes 5 miles of heavy, damp air ahead of it. You can literally feel the barometric pressure drop around you before the train ever appears.
And that piston effect generates something called infrasound.
What is infrasound?
These are low-frequency sound waves, typically under 20 hertz. Human ears cannot consciously hear infrasound, but our bodies absolutely feel it. The heavy machinery, the trains, and even the specific airflow over the tunnel portals generate intense infrasound waves.
And infrasound has a deeply documented effect on human physiology, doesn't it?
It does. It triggers a profound evolutionary sense of dread and sorrow. It causes hyperventilation and a drop in body temperature.
Which completely explains the sudden cold spots paranormal investigators report.
Exactly. Furthermore, the resonant frequency of the human eyeball happens to be roughly 18 hertz.
Wait. The sound waves actually vibrate the fluid in your eyes?
Yes. When subjected to infrasound around 18 hertz, your eyeballs begin to imperceptibly vibrate. This causes optical illusions, specifically the perception of gray blobs or glowing orbs in your peripheral vision.
The ghost lights.
The ghost lights. You combine the deep-seated psychological dread induced by the infrasound, the acoustic illusions of the Whispering Gallery, and the visual distortions caused by vibrating optical fluid, and you have a perfectly engineered machine for generating ghosts.
That is mind-blowing. The physics create the illusion, but the trauma dictates the shape of that illusion.
That's a great way to summarize it.
And the mechanics don't invalidate the experience of the haunting. They actually make it more profound. The tunnel itself is physically forcing you to feel the fear and claustrophobia of the men who built it. The mountain is transmitting their nightmare into your nervous system.
That is a brilliant synthesis, and it explains why the anomalies didn't stop when the tunnel was completed in 1875.
Because the environment is still generating them.
Right. The sources note that even today, modern freight trains suffer inexplicable mechanical failures right near the entrance. Modern paranormal investigators constantly set up audio equipment near the portals to capture EVP's electronic voice phenomena.
The folklore didn't die, it just evolved.
Exactly. It evolved from oral traditions of swinging lanterns to digital audio files of unexplained static.
Because the mechanism generating the lore, the infrasound, the acoustics, the barometric pressure, all of that is permanent.
It's built into the stone.
Yeah. When we step back and look at the entirety of the Hoosac Tunnel project, it stands as a monument to a very specific kind of human arrogance.
The belief that we can conquer geology.
Right. The belief that we can simply blast a hole through nature without nature exacting a toll. The engineering feat undeniably transformed the economy of the Northeast. But the human, the 200 men who drowned, suffocated, or were vaporized by nitroglycerin, left an indelible scar on the culture of the region.
It is the ultimate testament to the brutality of the Industrial Revolution. We celebrate the infrastructure, but the folklore forces us to remember the blood that lubricates the machine.
Well said.
The legends of the Bloody Pit ensure that the laborers, men who were often treated as expendable commodities back then, are never actually forgotten.
Which leaves us with a lingering thought to consider the next time you commute to work. We look at the Hoosac Tunnel a haunted curiosity because the folklore surrounding it is so loud.
Unignorable, really.
Right. But how much of our everyday modern infrastructure, the massive suspension bridges we drive over, the subterranean subway tunnels we commute through, the dams that power our cities, how much of that secretly serves as unmarked graves for the thousands of nameless laborers who died building them?
It's a sobering thought. A vast majority of 19th and early 20th century infrastructure projects have staggering mortality rates buried in their ledgers.
Which means our entire modern commute, the very convenience of our daily lives, is built on top of a massive, active graveyard. We aren't just driving over steel and concrete, we are driving through the suspended trauma of the people who built the modern world in the dark.
It entirely changes the definition of what a haunted location really is.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, and we will see you next time.